What happens when the wild cries out, and the only soul who answers is a baby? In today's heartwarming true story, an injured, feral bobcat finds himself helpless and alone, until a toddler's fearless compassion does what no tranquilizer, no expert, and no adult could ever do. What follows is a journey so touching, so unexpected, that it will leave you speechless. You won't believe how this incredible bond unfolded, or how it changed lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Pawprints Forever, like this video if you believe in the power of kindness, and comment below with where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family. Now settle in, because this is a story you will never forget. The woods surrounding the outskirts of Willow Falls were known for their quiet beauty. Ancient oaks standing guard like wise old sentinels, sunlight dripping through the canopy like honey, and the steady rhythm of nature humming in every direction. Most days the wildlife kept to itself. Deer tiptoed across the meadows, hawks floated above the tree line, and the occasional fox darted through the underbrush unseen. But on that morning something was different. A sharp, ragged cry pierced the calm. It wasn't a bird or a dog. It was raw, fierce, pained. It came from deep within the tangled fence that bordered the Macmillan family's backyard. Inside the cozy farmhouse, 19-month-old Clara was already awake, her soft brown curls glowing in the early morning sun. She sat near the sliding glass door in her footy pajamas, humming to herself and tapping a toy block against the glass. Her mother, Caroline, poured coffee in the kitchen and glanced at the clock, 6:43 a.m., too early for anything to be screaming like that in the woods. Then it came again. A cry, desperate, wild. Caroline stepped out onto the deck. The fog was lifting, the sun peeking through, and from beyond the field, near the tree line, something moved. At first, she thought it was a dog. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw the flash of tufted ears, a wild tail, a powerful body thrashing in panic. Her breath caught. "A bobcat," she whispered. Caroline's husband, Will, was already in the barn. She called for him, voice urgent, pointing toward the back fence. The creature was tangled, caught in the barbed wire that rimmed the base of the property. One of its legs was pinned between two strands. Blood stained the ground beneath it, and still it fought, hissing, yowling, clawing. But it couldn't break free. "I'm calling wildlife control," Will said immediately. "We can't risk getting near it ourselves." Caroline nodded. "I'll keep Clara inside." But when she turned back to the house, the screen door was open. And Clara was gone. Panic slammed into Caroline like a freight train. "Clara!" She sprinted across the porch, her bare feet slapping against the wood, eyes scanning the yard. There, just beyond the garden beds, was her daughter, waddling calmly through the wet grass, arms outstretched. And she was headed straight for the trapped bobcat. "Clara, no!" Caroline ran. Will vaulted the fence, boots stomping mud as he tried to approach from the side. But Clara didn't stop. She giggled, as if playing a game, undeterred by the screaming or the snarling creature ahead. The bobcat turned its head, body frozen in agony and confusion, eyes wild. Caroline's heart nearly stopped. But then, something impossible happened. The moment Clara reached the animal, she didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She sat down in the wet grass beside the fence, extended one small hand through the wire, and placed it gently on the bobcat's paw. The animal stilled. Utterly. Will and Caroline froze. The bobcat, once feral, frenzied, unapproachable, had gone completely still under the baby's touch. Its breathing slowed, its ears relaxed, its body, though trembling, stopped thrashing. Clara tilted her head and smiled. "Kitty," she whispered. Caroline's knees buckled as she reached them, scooping Clara up with shaking arms. The bobcat didn't lunge, didn't growl. It simply blinked, once, then lowered its head against the fence post and let out a sound that wasn't a growl at all. It was a sigh. Wildlife rescue arrived 15 minutes later. Two specialists, both in full protective gear, approached cautiously. They tranquilized the bobcat carefully, speaking in hushed tones, marveling at how calm it remained despite the pain. One of the men turned to Will, frowning with awe. "Never seen one this quiet in a trap, especially not a male this size. You sure he wasn't sedated before we got here?" Will shook his head. He was furious, until our daughter touched him. The rescuer blinked. "You let a toddler near a wild bobcat?" "No," Caroline said softly. She let herself near him. They named the bobcat Ash, for the smoky color of his fur and the fire in his eyes. The vet said he would survive. The leg wasn't broken, but the lacerations were deep. Recovery would take time and trust. Most rescued bobcats, the vet warned, never warmed up to human contact. They were solitary by nature, primal, often unpredictable even after months of care. But Ash was different. He hissed at the adults, tensed at the sound of boots or machines. But when Clara came to visit, carried carefully in Caroline's arms, he watched her with the same stillness from that morning. No growling, no resistance, just recognition. Caroline wasn't sure what had happened in that field. Instinct, luck, some unseen language between souls? But one thing was certain. A wild heart had been broken, and a child had heard the sound it made. Ash remained at the Willow Falls Wildlife Rehabilitation Center for the next several weeks. The staff treated his wounds, kept him under close observation, and maintained a sterile, quiet environment to reduce stress. From the very beginning, he made one thing clear. He wanted no part of anyone. Except her. Caroline and Will brought Clara by once a week. At first, they expected the visits to be for Clara's benefit, a way to help her understand what had happened that day. But it quickly became clear the connection went both ways. The moment Clara walked into the rehab center's viewing area, Ash would rise. The big cat, who otherwise lay motionless or slunk into shadows at the sound of adult voices, would lift his head, stretch slowly, and pad toward the glass divider with a deliberate calm. He would sit, face tilted slightly, golden eyes locked on the baby. Clara would giggle and press her palm to the glass. Ash would mirror her. Even the staff took notice. "Never seen anything like it," murmured Haley, one of the lead rehab techs. "Most bobcats hiss if you so much as look at them sideways, even after months of care." Will raised a brow. "But he just watches her." "Watches?" "He waits for her," Haley said. "We had to put a clock in his enclosure. He stares at it until 10 o'clock a.m., the time she usually arrives. On the days you don't come, he refuses to eat." Caroline glanced down at Clara, who was busy pressing her face to the glass and babbling softly to the big cat. "Maybe he remembers," she whispered, "that she didn't hurt him, that she didn't fear him." "Maybe," Haley said. "Or maybe she's the first being he's ever trusted." Word of the connection began to spread, not through tabloids or sensational headlines, but through quiet whispers from the rehab staff, local vet clinics, and nearby sanctuaries. A wildlife photographer from the state's conservation department asked if he could document Ash's recovery, especially the visits with Clara. He promised no flash, no disruptions. Just observation. Caroline hesitated, then agreed, on the condition that Clara not be overwhelmed or treated like a spectacle. The photographer, a kind-eyed man named Theo, kept his distance and worked silently. When he finally sent over the first batch of images, Caroline gasped. In one photo, Clara sat cross-legged on the visitor's bench, holding a small plush bobcat in her lap. Through the glass, Ash sat in perfect alignment with her, their eyes meeting across the invisible barrier. The caption Theo added read, "Wild recognizes wild, but sometimes it bows to gentleness." Despite his physical recovery, Ash remained unpredictable with everyone else. He hissed at the vet, refused to eat unless his dish was placed and retrieved silently, growled at the volunteers if they entered the enclosure too quickly. But whenever Clara was near, whether separated by glass or fence, he softened. It became clear he responded not just to her presence, but to her alone. The director of the rehab center, a woman named Dr. Rona Wells, requested a private meeting with Caroline and Will. "I know this will sound unorthodox," she began, folding her hands over a file of Ash's medical records. "But I believe Clara's presence is having a measurable therapeutic impact on Ash's behavior and recovery." Will raised an eyebrow. "You want her to come more often?" Dr. Wells nodded. "Yes. Not just as a visitor, but as part of a monitored routine. Only if you're comfortable, of course. We'd never pressure your family." Caroline glanced toward the window where Clara was now gently knocking on the glass wall of Ash's enclosure, singing in soft syllables. Ash watched her like a guardian spirit. "I think she's already made her decision," Caroline said. Over the next month, Clara's visits became a routine. Tuesdays and Fridays. Always the same time. Always the same reaction. Ash would rise the moment she entered, trot to the front of the enclosure and settle calmly beside the barrier. Sometimes he paced as she moved. Sometimes he simply lay with his chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded, listening to her chatter like he understood every word. Clara began bringing books. She couldn't read, of course, but she'd flip the pages slowly, pointing at pictures and mimicking the tone of storytelling. Ash always stayed for the whole reading. One morning, a storm rolled through Willow Falls. Lightning struck the pine woods, wind thrashed the fence lines, rain flooded the valley roads. Caroline called ahead to the center to cancel the day's visit. They understood. Ash did not. That evening, Dr. Wells called with concern. "We don't know how else to explain it. Ash is agitated. He's pacing non-stop, refusing food, ignoring his enrichment toys. It's like he's looking for her." Caroline pressed a hand to her mouth. "We'll be there first thing in the morning." The next day they arrived before sunrise. Ash was already at the front of the enclosure, staring at the door. When Clara entered, still half asleep and bundled in a puffy pink coat, Ash sat up straight and let out a low, guttural purr, somewhere between a growl and a greeting. Clara giggled, pressed her hands to the glass and whispered, "Sorry, kitty." Ash relaxed instantly. He didn't move for the next hour, just lay there, eyes closing in slow blinks, as if reassured that his tiny companion hadn't abandoned him. The staff stared in silence. That night, Caroline stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She turned to Will. "What happens when he's fully healed?" "He'll be released," Will said, voice low. "That's what they do." Caroline nodded. "I know, it's just... How do we explain that to her?" Will was quiet for a moment. How do we explain that to him? By mid-April, the forest around Willow Falls had shaken off winter's sleep. The trees stretched taller, grass thickened with dew, and birdsong returned in full chorus. Life surged forward. And so did Ash. The once wounded Bobcat had fully regained his strength. His coat gleamed, muscles rippled beneath his sleek frame, and his limp, nearly gone, was now only visible to the trained eyes of the wildlife staff. But even as his body healed, his spirit remained tethered, not to the woods, not to the wild, to her. Clara, now a full 2 years old, greeted every visit with the same joy and familiarity she once reserved for bedtime stories and teddy bears. "Ash!" she'd squeal, lifting her arms the moment they approached the enclosure. And like clockwork, Ash would appear, padding to the edge of the barrier with regal grace, ears twitching at the sound of her voice. Dr. Wells, clipboard in hand, stood nearby during one such visit and shook her head with a faint smile. "I've been working in wildlife rehabilitation for over 20 years. I've seen bears nurse cubs back to health, wolves take down fences, even an owl that played dead to escape transport. but I've never seen anything like this." Caroline watched as Clara read aloud from her latest picture book, while Ash crouched nearby, head tilted, tail flicking softly. "It's like he doesn't remember he's wild when she's near," Dr. Wells added. "Or maybe," Caroline said thoughtfully, "he remembers something better." Despite Ash's obvious connection to Clara, the rehab center couldn't ignore protocol forever. He was, after all, a wild bobcat, a species protected under both state and federal law. Ash had come in as a rescue. He had healed successfully, and under normal circumstances, that meant he would be released into the wild within weeks. Dr. Wells scheduled a formal behavioral evaluation with the Conservation Department. Wildlife officials from the state would come, observe Ash, and determine if he could survive outside rehab. The thought chilled Caroline. When she tucked Clara in that night, the little girl asked a question that broke her heart. "Can Ash come home?" Caroline paused, smoothing back her curls. "Ash lives in the woods, sweetie. That's where bobcats are happiest." "But I'm his home," Clara said simply. Caroline couldn't answer. She just hugged her daughter close and whispered, "I know, baby, I know." The day of the evaluation arrived. 3 state officials, wearing khaki shirts and stern expressions, stood silently as Dr. Wells led them to Ash's enclosure. He was lounging on a raised platform, eyes half-lidded, the picture of ease. They watched as he responded to standard tests: food retrieval, reaction to unfamiliar scents, tracking motions through brush inside his run. He passed all of it. "Excellent agility," one official noted. "Healthy weight and muscle tone," another added. Dr. Wells glanced nervously toward the entrance where Caroline and Clara stood watching from a distance. "Behaviorally, though," she began. The lead official waved a hand. "He's calm, yes, but that's not disqualifying. We've seen docile releases before. So long as there's no imprinting, he's good to go." Dr. Wells hesitated. "There is something you should see." She motioned for Caroline and Clara to step forward. Caroline carried Clara to the observation window. "Ash," Clara called softly. He turned immediately, lifted his head, trotted over, and did something no bobcat in captivity was ever known to do. He rolled onto his side, exposed his belly, and let out a low, vibrating sound, a blend of purr and sigh, as Clara pressed her palm to the glass. The officials stared in stunned silence. One of them murmured, "That's not normal." The lead official rubbed his jaw. "That's imprinting." Imprinting meant something dangerous in their world. It meant Ash had formed a deep emotional bond with a human, one that could compromise his instincts for survival. Animals that imprinted too strongly could seek out human interaction in the wild, risking conflict or capture. Imprinting meant Ash wasn't just rehabilitated. It meant he'd been changed. Dr. Wells met privately with the officials later that day. When she returned to the family, she looked heavy. "They're recommending against release," she said. Caroline exhaled, relief mixed with confusion. "So, what happens to him?" "He'll be placed in a sanctuary," Dr. Wells explained. "A permanent habitat, somewhere safe, spacious, but not wild." Clara, playing with her toy bobcat nearby, perked up at the sound of Ash's name. Caroline swallowed hard. "Can we visit?" "That's where it gets tricky," Dr. Wells said. "Sanctuaries typically don't allow regular visitation, especially with children. And this place, it's in the next state over." Caroline's heart sank. That evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line and fireflies danced in the shadows, Caroline and Will sat on the porch watching Clara trace circles in the dirt with a stick. She hummed softly. Not sad, just quiet. "She doesn't understand," Will said. "She will," Caroline replied. "But it's going to hurt." He nodded.
You think Ash will be okay? I think, she paused, voice catching. I think he'll feel something missing. For a long time. They sat in silence, both remembering the impossible moment when their daughter touched a wounded predator, and it chose peace.
Caroline made the decision the next morning. They would go with Ash to the sanctuary. They would say goodbye properly, and give Clara a final moment, not of loss, but of love. The morning of Ash's transfer arrived with a pale mist lingering over the fields, gentle, ghost-like, as if nature itself sensed the weight of the day. The Macmillans woke early. Clara was dressed in her favorite overalls, clutching her small stuffed bobcat to her chest. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she knew it was something big. Caroline packed snacks, extra blankets, and the photo album they'd made of Clara's visits with Ash. Each page was filled with images Theo the photographer had gifted them, proof of the impossible friendship that bloomed between a toddler and a wild thing. They arrived at the rehabilitation center just before sunrise. A specially outfitted van, arranged by the sanctuary, was already parked near the rear gate. It was clean, climate-controlled, with a padded crate lined with straw and cloth to keep Ash calm. Dr. Wells stood nearby, clipboard in hand, her usually calm expression tinged with emotion. He's ready, she said softly. Caroline bent down and whispered to Clara, Want to say goodbye to your friend? Clara nodded, eyes wide, solemn in a way only young children can be when they sense change. Ash stood in his enclosure, pacing slowly, his body tense. He wasn't limping, wasn't growling, but he knew something was different. The moment he spotted Clara approaching the glass, he stopped. She placed her hand on the divider. Hi, Kitty. Ash walked to her. And instead of stopping short like usual, he pressed his face directly against the barrier, his nose aligned with her palm, his eyes deep and quiet. A long moment passed. Then Clara did something she'd never done before. She placed the stuffed bobcat toy on the bench, lifted it toward the glass and whispered, You take him. He'll be with you. Ash stared at the toy for several seconds, then sat down calmly. Dr. Wells blinked back tears. I don't know what it means, she said softly, but he understands her. He always has. It took 3 people to gently guide Ash into the crate. He didn't fight, didn't resist. He simply walked in with slow dignity, curling into the bedding and resting his chin on his paws. Clara stood near the back doors of the van, watching. Then, without prompting, she stepped forward and kissed the side of the van's door. Bye-bye, Ash. The drive to the sanctuary was 3 hours through winding mountain roads and deep forest trails. Caroline and Will followed in their SUV, with Clara sleeping in the back seat, the bobcat toy now resting in her lap instead of her arms. They arrived just after noon. The Wild Acres Sanctuary was breathtaking. Nestled between rolling green hills and natural springs, it was a refuge not only for bobcats, but also for wolves, foxes, and even black bears that couldn't be released back into the wild. The staff welcomed Ash with quiet reverence. This is the first transfer we've ever received where we were instructed to accommodate a child's visit, said the sanctuary director, a gentle older man named Jonas. But after reading the file, I understand. Ash's new enclosure was sprawling. Thousands of square feet of grass, trees, a private den and climbing platforms built to mimic his natural habitat. It would never replace the freedom of the wild, but it was the next best thing. They allowed Clara one final moment before Ash was released into the space. She stood at the fence, gripping the chain links with both hands. Ash paced behind the gate. When the door opened, he stepped out slowly, cautiously sniffing the earth. He paused, turned back toward the little girl, and sat just a few feet from the fence. Not close enough to touch, not close enough to be held, but close enough to know. I love you, Kitty, Clara said softly. And for the first time in weeks,
Ash blinked once, slowly, then walked away, into the trees, where the sun broke through in golden shafts of light. The ride home was silent. Clara dozed most of the way, her hand curled around the plush bobcat again. Caroline stared out the window, heart full of strange, swirling emotions, pride, loss, awe. She reached into her bag and pulled out the photo album. On the first page was a picture Theo had captured, Clara's hand on the glass, Ash mirroring her from the other side. Below it, Caroline had written in pen, "Love doesn't always speak the same language. Sometimes it just listens." Back home, life returned to a gentle rhythm. Clara began drawing Ash in her sketchpad every day. Crayon portraits of a big cat with kind eyes standing beside a girl with curly hair and an outstretched hand. They hung her drawings on the fridge. They made a shelf for the photo album. And once a week, Clara asked, "Can we go see him?" Caroline always answered the same, "Soon, baby, soon." A month passed, then two. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope postmarked from the sanctuary. Inside was a note from Jonas. "Dear Macmillan family, we wanted to update you on Ash. He's thriving, eating well, active, peaceful. But what's truly remarkable is what happens every Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m., the time you used to visit. Like clockwork, Ash walks to the viewing area, sits beside the fence, and stays there for exactly 15 minutes. Every week. We believe he's waiting for her. You're welcome to visit any time. With deepest respect, Jonas." That Saturday, at 2 p.m. sharp, Clara and Caroline stood once more at the sanctuary fence. Ash emerged from the trees just as described and sat in the shade facing them. He didn't pace. He didn't growl. He just was. Calm, watching, remembering. Clara whispered, "I missed you." Ash didn't move. But somehow, everyone standing there felt the answer. The return visits to Wild Acres Sanctuary became a sacred tradition. Every other Saturday, Caroline and Clara made the drive through the winding back roads, past the river and the pine stands, and up the gravel path to the gates of the sanctuary. They always arrived 10 minutes before 2 p.m., never late. And every single time, Ash was waiting. He wouldn't arrive with fanfare or excitement. He would simply appear, emerging from the trees with his head high and his movements slow, as if he had never once forgotten the time, the day, or the sound of tiny footsteps that would soon follow. The sanctuary staff had built a quiet bench under a maple tree facing Ash's enclosure. They called it Clara's Corner. Jonas, the sanctuary director, had a small bronze plaque made that read, "Where the wild and the gentle meet." Caroline cried the first time she saw it. Clara ran to the bench and sat proudly, swinging her feet as Ash sat just 20 feet away, his golden eyes unblinking, his tail brushing the grass slowly back and forth. Clara's presence did something to Ash no one could quite explain. He became more open, at least on his terms. He allowed the sanctuary staff to approach more easily. He stopped reacting to the clang of gates or the hum of machinery. He began showing signs of comfort in his surroundings, sunbathing in open areas, playing with enrichment logs, even purring when certain caregivers were near. But only Clara got the belly roll. Only Clara got the soft chirps he never made to anyone else. "It's like she rewired him," one volunteer murmured. Jonas smiled, or reminded him what it means to feel safe. Caroline began journaling each visit. She wrote down Clara's observations, funny little quotes, the way she described Ash's smile, how she'd talk to him like he was just another kid in her preschool class. "He likes when I bring books with birds in them. Ash thinks ants are tickly," he told me. "His eyes look like sunshine and puddles mixed together." She wasn't wrong. By midsummer, the sanctuary offered Caroline a unique proposal. "We'd like to invite Clara to participate in a pilot program," Jonas explained during one visit. We're working with a few pediatric therapists to explore how animal interaction can support emotional development in young children. Caroline raised a brow.
Clara's not even 3 yet. Jonas smiled. That's exactly why she's perfect. She isn't trained to connect with animals. She just does an Ash. He responds to her in ways that redefine what we thought possible. The idea was simple. Clara would visit with a trained therapist nearby, and her natural behavior would be gently observed. No pressure, no tests, just interaction. In exchange, Clara would be granted permanent access to a section of the sanctuary's inner fence, allowing her and Ash to be safely closer than any other visitor. Caroline talked it over with Will. They both agreed.
It wasn't just about Ash anymore. It was about what he and Clara had created together, a bridge between fear and trust, wild and human, silence and healing. The pilot sessions began in early August. Clara, completely unaware of the attention her bond was receiving, simply walked up to Ash's fence one morning and whispered, "Hi, buddy. I missed you so much." Ash, for the first time, stood from a resting position and walked the length of the fence with her. He paced with her, turned when she turned, sat when she did. The therapist, observing from 20 feet away, scribbled notes furiously, her expression unreadable. That evening, Jonas shared something personal with Caroline. "My daughter was Clara's age when we lost her," he said, voice thick with memory. "It was sudden. A medical condition we didn't know about until it was too late. I thought I'd never be near children again, that I wouldn't be able to bear it." Caroline touched his arm gently. "I'm so sorry." He nodded. "Thank you. But when I watch your daughter and Ash, it's like watching a different kind of language unfold, one I wish I'd known before, one that doesn't use words but still says you are safe, you are seen, you are loved." Caroline didn't know what to say, so she just listened, the way Clara always did with Ash. Then came the article. A journalist from a national wildlife magazine had caught wind of the story and requested an exclusive. Jonas hesitated. Caroline hesitated. But after a long discussion, they agreed. If the story was told respectfully, truthfully, and focused on the emotional and therapeutic value of the bond, it could help raise awareness for sanctuary funding and animal rehabilitation programs. The article, titled "The Bobcat and the Baby, When Nature Learns to Trust," featured high-resolution images of Clara and Ash, always from behind the fence, always showing the peaceful symmetry of their interactions. The piece went viral within 48 hours, not because it was flashy, but because it was real, a story the world didn't know it needed. Letters poured in. From parents of autistic children, from combat veterans who had stopped speaking, from wildlife workers who had lost faith in what they did. This story made me cry in the middle of my shift. I didn't think gentleness mattered anymore, but maybe it does. I saw my daughter in Clara. I saw myself in Ash. The sanctuary's donations tripled. Therapists from around the country called to ask how they could model similar programs. But for Clara, nothing changed. Every other Saturday she came with her crayon drawings and her stuffed bobcat. Every other Saturday Ash showed up, on time, calm, present. And then, one morning, Clara didn't show. Ash waited. 20 minutes passed. Then an hour. He didn't pace. He didn't growl. He just stood at the fence, unmoving. Then he walked back into the trees. Jonas called Caroline later that day, concerned. Caroline apologized. "Clara woke up with a fever. We didn't want to risk spreading anything. She's resting now." Jonas understood. But as he stood watching Ash stare at the empty bench, he realized something. This wasn't just about comfort. Ash needed her, just as she had once needed him. The fever wasn't serious, just one of those fleeting childhood bugs that pass like sudden summer storms. Clara spent 2 quiet days on the couch, snuggled under a knitted blanket with her bobcat plush tucked beneath her arm. She was sleepy but cheerful. Her appetite returned quickly. By Wednesday she was toddling around again, already asking when they could go see Ash. Caroline smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. This Saturday, just like always. But something lingered in her chest, a quiet unease. It wasn't about Clara, it was about him. At Wild Acres, Ash was different. Since Clara's missed visit, he'd grown still, restless in his own silence. He wandered the outer perimeter of his enclosure more frequently, scanning the path from which she always came. He sniffed the air, sat by the fence longer than usual. When a staff member attempted to distract him with a scent log, Ash batted it aside. He ignored his enrichment crate, barely touched his food. Jonas stood outside the enclosure that Thursday afternoon, watching as Ash paced along the fence and paused beside the now empty bench. "He's grieving," murmured Mara, one of the senior caretakers. "It's only been 1 week." Jonas sighed. To him, a week without her might feel like forever. Saturday came, and with it, so did Clara. Bundled in a soft yellow sweater, cheeks flushed from the cool air, she stepped onto the path and ran the final few feet to the bench. Ash, the big cat, didn't come immediately. He was crouched in the trees, half hidden in the shadows. Then, after several heartbeats, he rose. Slowly, cautiously. He moved toward her, each step deliberate, his tail sweeping wide through the tall grass. Caroline held her breath as Clara pressed her hands to the fence.
"Ash, I missed you so much." When he reached her, he didn't sit like usual. Instead, he pressed his side gently against the chain link and remained there, eyes closing, body completely relaxed. Clara leaned her head against the fence on the other side. No words passed, but the silence was thick with meaning. Later that afternoon, Jonas invited the family into the visit center for something special. A framed photo now hung on the back wall. It was one of Theo's images, printed in soft sepia tones. Clara and Ash, both sitting in profile, their gazes locked through the fence, a field of clover between them. Beneath it was a brass plaque. "When fear meets kindness, even the wild learns to rest." Clara clapped her hands and squealed, "That's me and my kitty." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't sure how long these visits would continue. She wasn't sure what the future held for a child who had once reached through wire and soothed a feral heart. But she knew this moment mattered. And she knew it would last. Somewhere. Forever. The following week, a letter arrived at the Macmillans' home. It was on official state letterhead and addressed directly to Caroline. Inside it read, "Dear Mrs. Macmillan, we've been following your daughter's extraordinary connection with Ash. After reviewing the behavioral data and receiving extensive reports from Wild Acres staff, we would like to formally request your family's participation in the state's inaugural Human-Wildlife Emotional Bond Research Initiative. This is the first time in our department's history that a non-domestic species has formed such a documented and consistent connection with a child. We believe studying this bond, safely and ethically, could open doors in trauma therapy, wildlife rehabilitation, and behavioral science. Participation is completely voluntary, but we believe Clara's role could help reshape the understanding of empathy between species. Respectfully, Dr. Evelyn Stern, Department of Wildlife Research and Rehabilitation." Caroline read it 3 times before showing it to Will. He stared at the letter, then at Clara, playing with blocks on the floor. "She's not even 3, he said slowly. "I know," Caroline replied. "But they're right. She's doing something we've never seen before. Do we want her to be part of something so big?" Caroline looked out the window, then down at the letter. She already is. They called Jonas first. He had received the same letter. "I won't push you either way," he assured. "But I will say this. What Clara and Ash have isn't just a bond. It's a blueprint
for healing, for trust, for something we don't fully understand yet. Caroline's voice was soft. What if the research makes it too much? Jonas chuckled. Caroline, your daughter calms a wild animal by reading him stories about caterpillars. I don't think anyone can make it more than it already is. They agreed to a meeting. The first of many. The research initiative would be cautious, slow, designed entirely around Clara's well-being. No cameras shoved in her face, no wires, no forced interactions. Just quiet observation of something that already existed. And more importantly, it would allow Clara and Ash to continue seeing each other, regularly, indefinitely. One morning a few weeks later, the family returned to Wild Acres for their first session under the program. The setup was simple. Clara played by the fence. Ash, now entirely used to the new presence of observers seated far away, came as usual. But something new happened. Clara reached into her small backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A drawing. Crayon on construction paper, herself and Ash beneath a rainbow. She held it up proudly. Ash, this is us. The big cat blinked, then walked slowly to the fence, and with the gentlest motion anyone had ever seen from a bobcat, he rubbed the side of his face along the mesh, marking it with scent, as cats do with things they love. The researchers watched in silence. One of them whispered, "He just claimed her." The story of Clara and Ash had already traveled far, through magazines, through whispers in wildlife circles, through the quiet reverence of those who'd seen the photos. But after the bobcat marked the fence in response to Clara's crayon drawing, something shifted. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a phenomenon. By late autumn, the Department of Wildlife Research had fully set up its initiative at Wild Acres Sanctuary. Observation towers were constructed at a respectful distance, cameras installed discreetly, none directed at Clara's face. Just the fence, the field, the space between her and the bobcat. Clara's presence was never coerced. She was free to play, to wander within the fenced zone, to draw or not draw, read or not read. Nothing about their interactions was scripted. But Ash responded every time, every visit. He greeted her like clockwork. Even on days when she simply sat in silence, picking at grass or humming to herself, Ash stayed near, watching, listening, waiting. Dr. Evelyn Stern, the program director, came to meet the family in person one afternoon. She knelt beside Clara and offered a stuffed owl. "Thank you for being such a good friend to Ash," she said. Clara took the owl gently, then looked past her toward the field where Ash sat, tail flicking. "He likes quiet," Clara said softly. "And the color green." Dr. Stern blinked, caught off guard. "How do you know that?" Clara didn't answer. She just sat down, pulled out her crayons, and began coloring a green meadow with a soft blue sky. Dr. Stern stood beside Caroline, speechless. "She just knows," Caroline whispered. "She always has." Back at home, things remained as grounded and simple as ever. Clara played with her toys, practiced tracing letters, and watched dragonflies through the window. But there was one thing that had changed. She began to dream of Ash. Often, she'd wake up and say, "Ash was in the trees, he said hi." Or, "He was cold. I gave him my blanket." The dreams were always peaceful. And when she visited the sanctuary afterward, Ash would sit closer, sometimes within just a few feet of the fence, his breathing slow, his eyes steady. One researcher noted, he doesn't look at her the way animals usually look at humans. It's as if he remembers another life. One rainy Saturday, they arrived at Wild Acres to find Ash in a foul mood. He wasn't aggressive, but he was pacing hard. His ears twitched, his tail whipped sharply.
Mara, the caretaker, frowned. There was a coyote near the outer fence this morning. We scared it off, but Ash has been on edge ever since. Clara stood by the bench watching quietly. She didn't speak. Didn't try to call him. She simply sat on the ground, pulled her knees to her chest and waited. 20 minutes passed. Ash didn't approach. Then slowly, inch by inch, he began to calm. He lay down at the far end of the enclosure, still watchful, but still. Later, Dr. Stern said softly. She regulated him, without touching, without saying a word. Jonas pulled Caroline aside that evening. There's a term we use sometimes in trauma therapy: co-regulation. It's when one person's calm presence helps someone else's nervous system settle. Usually it's a parent with a baby, or a therapist with a patient. Caroline glanced at Clara, who was now playing with pebbles beside the fence. And you think she's doing that for Ash? Jonas nodded. Without a doubt. And what's even more extraordinary, he does it for her too. That winter, Wild Acres was granted a special funding extension through the research initiative. The funds were earmarked to expand the enclosure and create a dedicated education center inspired by Clara and Ash. They named it the Listening Place. Its mission: to teach children empathy toward wildlife through observation, storytelling, and silence. Not lectures, not performances, just space to sit, to watch, to wait, the way Clara did.
At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Caroline was asked to speak. She didn't prepare a speech. She simply stood at the podium, her daughter holding her hand, and said, "I don't think we found Ash to change him. I think he found us. To remind us that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when not to run, and the greatest love is offered without expecting anything back. My daughter didn't tame him. She heard him. And that was enough." The room fell silent, then erupted into applause. But Clara, unfazed, wandered back toward the fence where Ash sat watching, as calm as ever. That night, as snow began to fall gently outside their farmhouse, Caroline tucked Clara into bed and kissed her forehead. "Did you have fun today?" Clara nodded sleepily. Ash was proud. Caroline paused. "Proud?" "He told me." Caroline smiled, running her fingers through her daughter's hair. "And what did you tell him?" Clara yawned. "I told him I'll always come back." Outside, beneath the moonlight, snow fell quietly over the woods. And hundreds of miles away from the world's noise, a wild heart rested peacefully because it had been heard. Winter deepened its hold on Willow Falls. Icicles clung to the eaves of homes like frozen lace. The roads frosted over each morning, glittering under pale sunlight, and at Wild Acres Sanctuary, the woods grew stiller than ever, silent, except for the distant rustle of wildlife moving cautiously beneath snow-laden branches. Ash didn't mind the cold. He was in his element. His winter coat grew thick and full, a shimmering silver grey that blended into the frosty underbrush like shadow and moonlight entwined. He roamed his enclosure with a quiet, deliberate grace, pressing his paws into the soft snow and vanishing into the trees for hours at a time. But always, he returned. Every other Saturday, just before 2 p.m., Ash appeared at the edge of the field, and Clara was always there to meet him. Clara, now 3.5, had changed in subtle ways. Her language had blossomed, her drawings were more detailed, and her sense of empathy had grown so sensitive her preschool teacher called it a gift beyond her years. "She soothes the other children when they cry," the teacher told Caroline. "She doesn't say much. She just puts her hand on their shoulder or gives them a toy, and they stop. I've never seen anything like it." Caroline smiled, though her heart ached with the knowledge of how that gift had been shaped, not through books or lessons, but through the silent bond with a wild animal that never asked for healing, yet gave it freely. One snowy Saturday, Clara insisted on bringing something new to the sanctuary, a string of small, hand-folded paper hearts. She'd made them herself, with a little help, scribbling tiny drawings on each one. Ash's pawprints, trees, suns, stars, and one that simply said, "I love you, Kitty." She handed them to Jonas upon arrival. "These are for his trees," she said seriously. Jonas chuckled. "For his trees." Clara nodded. "So he knows we're always there, even when we're not." Touched, Jonas helped string the paper hearts through the lower branches of a pine tree just inside Ash's enclosure. Each one fluttered in the winter wind like tiny flags of devotion. Ash arrived moments later, and instead of sitting in his usual spot, he padded directly to the tree. He sniffed the paper gently, then sat beneath it, as if he knew, as if he felt the message in every fold. Weeks passed, then months. Clara's visits continued, undisturbed. Ash never missed one. Even when icy sleet blanketed the sanctuary and the wind howled through the trees, he appeared, always on time, always calm. And each time, he stayed longer. One day, Clara whispered to him through the fence, "You don't have to come if you're sleepy." Ash yawned, right on cue, and laid his head on his paws. They both sat that way for nearly an hour, still, serene. The researchers watching from the observation hut didn't bother taking notes that day. They just watched and let their hearts absorb the quiet wonder of it all. One Sunday morning, Jonas made an unexpected call to the Macmillans. "Clara's been nominated," he said. Caroline blinked, confused. "Nominated? For what?" "For the Children of Peace Medal," Jonas said, barely holding back emotion. "It's awarded to children under 12 who have shown extraordinary empathy, courage, or influence in promoting healing, understanding, or compassion between people or animals." Caroline was stunned. She's only 3. Jonas laughed softly, and somehow she's done more than most people do in a lifetime. When the letter arrived a week later, it was sealed in gold foil. Caroline sat at the kitchen table and read it 3 times before calling Will. Then she sat Clara down, holding her hand gently. "Sweetheart," she said, "some very kind people think you and Ash did something very special. They want to give you a medal for being a good friend." Clara tilted her head. "Do I have to leave, Ash?" No, Caroline said quickly. "It just means they want to say thank you." Clara thought for a moment. "Can I give Ash a medal too?" Caroline smiled through tears. "I think that's a beautiful idea." The award ceremony was held in the spring, at a quiet outdoor amphitheater lined with flowers. Clara wore a simple white dress and a green ribbon in her hair, the same green she always used when drawing meadows for Ash. She was the youngest recipient the organization had ever recognized. But when she walked on stage holding her plush Bobcat in one hand and her mother's hand in the other, the crowd didn't see a child. They saw something ancient, timeless. The pure, unquestioning trust of a heart that had once heard a wild creature cry and answered with love. During her brief moment at the microphone, Clara didn't speak long. She simply said, "Ash is my friend. He was scared, but I waited, and then he waited too." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Back at Wild Acres, the sanctuary held a small private celebration for Ash. The staff hung a green ribbon on the fence near his favorite tree. Clara presented him with a tiny wooden medallion shaped like a paw print. She held it up, then tucked it into a small knot in the tree bark just inside the fence. "This one's for you," she whispered. Ash leaned forward and touched his nose to the bark. That evening, Caroline and Jonas walked side by side through the sanctuary paths. "You think he knows what happened?" Caroline asked quietly. Jonas watched Ash stretch out beneath the tree, tail flicking lazily. "I think he knows she came back. I think he always knows that." Caroline looked toward her daughter, who was now humming softly and drawing shapes in the dirt. "I don't know how long this will last," she said, I know nothing lasts forever. Jonas nodded slowly. But what they built, that might. Summer unfurled like a warm, familiar song. At the sanctuary, the trees were thick with green leaves, birds chirped like tiny flutes in the canopy, and dragonflies skimmed over the tall grass. It was a golden season, one where everything felt full, alive, and somehow suspended in perfect harmony. For Clara and Ash, it was the best season yet. By now, the story of the girl and the bobcat had become folklore in the sanctuary and surrounding communities. Local schoolchildren wrote essays about Clara. Artists sent paintings of Ash. And yet, Clara remained entirely unchanged. She still greeted Ash the same way. "Hi, buddy." Still brought drawings, her bobcat plush, and sometimes dandelion bouquets she insisted he would like. Still sat quietly when he needed space. Still stayed when he came near. And Ash, he was different only in how much he gave. He now approached the fence at a slow trot instead of a cautious walk. He brushed his flank against the mesh like a house cat against a familiar doorframe. He chirped, purred, even laid down belly up on sunny days while Clara sang to him. It was trust, yes. But it was something more. It was devotion. On Clara's 4th birthday, the sanctuary hosted a small celebration. Nothing flashy. Just a picnic table under the trees, animal-shaped cookies, a chocolate cupcake with 4 candles, and a new hand-sewn bobcat plush from Mara, the caretaker who had once feared Ash might never recover. "Ash's twin," Mara had said, placing it into Clara's arms. Clara giggled. "Now he has a buddy too." Across the field, Ash paced the fence in a slow, relaxed loop, occasionally glancing their way. At one point during the celebration, Clara stood up, wandered to the fence, and held her new plush in the air. Ash stopped, watched her, then sat in the grass, tail flicking, and yawned. Not a threatening yawn, but one of calm, of belonging, as if to say, "I see your gift, and I accept it." That evening, as the family packed up to leave, Clara grew quiet. More quiet than usual. In the car, she held her new plush tightly and stared out the window. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Caroline asked gently. Clara nodded, then whispered, "Ash is happy." Caroline smiled. "He is." "But I think—" Clara hesitated. "I think he's waiting for something." Caroline glanced at Will, concerned. "Waiting for what, baby?" Clara looked down at the plush in her arms. "For me to say it's okay." The next day, Jonas called. "Ash has started climbing the outer trees in his enclosure," he said. "He's getting higher, watching the sky more. He hasn't done that in over a year." Caroline's heart gave a little twist. "You think he's preparing to leave?" Jonas paused. "Not in the way you're thinking. He's not being released, but sometimes even animals start shifting when something in them changes. He's content, curious, like he's looking beyond." Caroline knew exactly what he meant. That week they skipped the Saturday visit. Not because they forgot, but because Clara asked them to. "I want him to miss me," she said, "just for one day, so he knows it's okay to do things without me now." Caroline blinked back tears. "You sure?" Clara nodded. "He'll still love me." The following Saturday, they returned. Ash came to the fence like always. But this time, instead of waiting for Clara to come to him, he circled wide, moving through his trees, scaling his platforms, climbing high and watching from above, before descending with a slow, proud leap. Clara stood clapping. "You're so fast," she said joyfully. Ash trotted toward the fence, gave a short, contented chirp, then sat. Clara walked to the bench and unzipped her backpack. She pulled out her newest drawing. It was different this time. Not a picture of her and Ash together, but of Ash alone, standing at the edge of the trees, staring at a golden horizon. She held it to the fence and whispered, "You can go if you want to." Ash looked at her. Then slowly he stood and walked into the woods, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in peace. "He's not leaving forever," Clara said that night as Caroline tucked her into bed. Caroline kissed her cheek. "How do you know?" "Because love doesn't live in cages," Clara murmured. "It just finds new places to walk." At Wild Acres, Ash began spending more time deep in the woods of his enclosure, climbing higher, hunting quietly, watching birds soar across the canopy. He always returned, but less often to the fence, more often to the breeze. One day, a sanctuary worker found something curious near Ash's favorite tree, a line of feathers, arranged in a loose spiral. No kill, no struggle, just feathers, placed carefully in the grass. And beside them, one of Clara's folded paper hearts, weathered from months in the rain, but still intact. No one knew how it got there. But Jonas didn't question it. He just smiled and whispered to the trees, "Thank you." Autumn returned to Willow Falls with its palette of fire and gold. The sanctuary's trees began shedding their leaves in slow-motion waves, and a soft chill crept into the mornings. Everything felt quieter, more reflective, as if the world itself had taken a breath to sit down and remember. So did Clara. She was 4.5 now, taller, her curls longer, her words fuller. But when she spoke of Ash, her voice still held the softness of a girl who had once reached through wire to comfort something wild and hurting. Only now, she spoke of him in past tense. Ash hadn't vanished. He still lived at Wild Acres, still roamed his massive enclosure, still basked in the sun and climbed his favorite trees. But he no longer came to the fence on Saturdays. He hadn't for 3 weeks. And Clara understood. "He's still here," she said one day as they sat on their usual bench. "He just doesn't need to see me to remember." Caroline nodded, her heart both breaking and swelling. "That's right, baby. He remembers everything." Clara smiled. "So do I." Jonas had seen it too, the transition. Ash had changed again, not with anger or withdrawal, but with calm. He was more engaged with the natural rhythms of his environment. He hunted squirrels and sparrows, played with fallen branches, even shared territory, peacefully, with another bobcat in the neighboring enclosure. He had become what no one expected him to become, a wild animal at peace. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the trees, Jonas invited Clara and her family to a private trail beyond the main sanctuary, a secluded walk where few were ever allowed. At the end of the path stood a new installation, a carved wooden bench under a willow tree overlooking a still pond. At the bench's center, a small brass plaque gleamed in the sun. It read, "To Clara, the girl who heard the wild and never asked it to be anything else." Beneath the bench, tucked carefully inside a weatherproof display box, was one of Clara's first drawings of Ash, his great eyes soft, his tail curled, and a tiny hand reaching out toward him. Caroline covered her mouth, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Will knelt beside Clara. "Well?" he asked gently. "What do you think?" Clara didn't answer. She just sat and listened. That evening, after dinner, Clara pulled out her crayons one last time. She didn't draw Ash. She drew the woods, trees tall and strong, a winding trail, and at the center, a bobcat on a hill silhouetted by the sun. Alone, but not lonely. Above it, in soft, uncertain letters, she wrote, "Thank you for waiting for me. Now I know how to wait too." The visits didn't stop entirely. Every few months, Caroline and Clara would return. They'd sit at the old bench by the fence or walk the quiet trail to the new memorial. Sometimes Ash appeared, perched high in the branches, watching from a distance. Other times only the rustling leaves would greet them. But Clara always smiled. "He's still here," she would say. He just doesn't need to come close anymore. And that was okay. As the years passed, Wild Acres grew, more animals arrived, more programs were funded, more children sat in quiet fields learning not to tame the wild, but to listen to it. And at the heart of it all was a story of a bobcat, a baby, a fence that once separated them, and the touch that broke that barrier forever. On Clara's 10th birthday, the sanctuary held a private celebration for her. She stood taller now, her curls braided, her voice stronger, but her gaze hadn't changed. Still soft, still brave. They walked the path together, Caroline, Will, Jonas and Clara, back to the willow tree. The bench was still there, and so was the pond. But something new had been added, a small hand-carved wooden sculpture, a bobcat and a little girl, seated side by side, gazing at the horizon. No words, just presence, just peace. That night, Clara lay in bed beneath a quilt covered in leaves and paw prints, her stuffed bobcat, faded but cherished, curled in her arms. "Mama," she whispered. "Yes, baby." "Do you think Ash ever dreams about me?" Caroline smiled through the lump in her throat. "I think he doesn't have to, because you're in his heart, just like he's in yours." Clara nodded, eyes drifting closed. And as sleep took her, the wind whispered through the open window, carrying with it the faintest echo, not a growl, not a howl, but something wilder and softer, a thank you. And that's how a baby's gentle touch saved a wild heart, and in doing so showed the world that love doesn't need language, only presence. Clara and Ash taught us something profound, that trust can be earned with silence, healing can bloom from stillness, and sometimes the wildest souls are the ones most in need of being heard. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who could use a little hope today, and subscribe to Pawprints Forever for more true stories of unbreakable bonds between animals and the humans who love them. And don't forget, leave us a comment below with your thoughts and let us know which part of this story moved you the most. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, listen gently, love wildly, and keep leaving Pawprints forever.